The colonel dismissed her theory about invisible damage until she showed him the hairline crack that could kill every soldier in the convoy. Some scars only a survivor can see. The $2 million MRAP sat motionless in Fort Bragg's motor pool. Mine-resistant, ambush-protected, built to withstand roadside bombs, engineered to survive ambush attacks. It had emerged victorious from 12 different IED explosions in Afghanistan, but now it lay completely dead after a simple test drive. Status report. Colonel Marcus Rodriguez spoke into his radio, surveying the motor pool from his office window. "Sir, the 3rd Engineering Team has also failed," Staff Sergeant Thompson's voice crackled through. "Fuel system is completely down. Engine runs. Electrical systems are operational, but the fuel system won't respond." Rodriguez frowned. In his 25 years of military service, he had never encountered anything like this. This vehicle had been tested under the harshest conditions on the battlefield. It had withstood bomb blasts, rocket attacks, and heavy weapon fire. How could it possibly fail on a smooth road? "How many experts have we called in so far?" 2 teams from the Pentagon, engineers from General Dynamics, test specialists from Aberdeen Proving Ground, Thompson listed. 8 experts total. They all reached the same conclusion. The fuel system is too complex. We need to dismantle the entire system to find the problem. "How long would that take?" "At least 4 weeks, sir. And that's if we can source replacement parts afterward." Rodriguez approached the window. The MRAP's massive hull gleamed in the sunlight, its heavy armored plating designed to protect lives. This vehicle was scheduled to lead a convoy to Afghanistan in 3 days. If the problem couldn't be solved, 20 soldiers' lives could be at risk. The stakes were higher than just one mission. This MRAP was part of a new generation of vehicles, representing millions in development costs. If a design flaw existed, it could affect the entire fleet. Hundreds of vehicles, thousands of soldiers, all potentially at risk. Has this vehicle ever malfunctioned before? No, sir. In fact, it performed perfectly in Afghanistan. The problem only started last week. What changed last week? Thompson paused to think. New testing protocol began, sir. Durability testing on rough terrain. It completed several runs on Rocky Hill's challenging course. Rodriguez stopped. Rough terrain? But this vehicle has seen combat conditions. Yes, sir, very strange. It can handle bomb explosions, but fails on normal terrain. Who else is working in the motor pool? Routine maintenance crew, sir. Cleaning staff, parts handlers. Oh, and retired Sergeant Mitchell. Mitchell? Staff Sergeant Zoe Mitchell, retired 3 years ago. Now works part-time in the motor pool. Routine maintenance duties. Rodriguez thought. That name sounded familiar. What's Mitchell's military record? Thompson typed rapidly on his keyboard. Sir, 18 years of service, combat engineer. 3 deployments to Afghanistan, 2 to Iraq. Has EOD certification, explosive ordnance disposal, and he hesitated. And Purple Heart recipient, wounded in an IED blast. Final duty report mentions post-traumatic stress. Rodriguez's jaw tightened. Another talented soldier pushed out of the system due to PTSD. Where is Mitchell now? Back section of the motor pool, sir. Performing routine vehicle maintenance. Get her. The motor pool buzzed with frustrated energy. Engineers clustered around laptops, their faces etched with confusion. Diagnostic equipment lay scattered across workbenches, each piece having failed to reveal the MRAP's secrets. The vehicle sat like a sleeping giant, its armor gleaming, but its heart silent. This doesn't make sense, muttered Dr. James Crawford from General Dynamics, wiping sweat from his forehead. Every system checks out perfectly. Fuel pumps operational, electrical connections solid. Computer diagnostics show green across the board. Maybe it's a software glitch, suggested Captain Peters, the motor pool's commanding officer. These new vehicles have so much computer integration. We've reloaded the software 3 times, replied Technical Sergeant Williams. Even tried older firmware versions. Nothing. The frustration was palpable. This wasn't just about one vehicle. It was about confidence in American military technology. If their most advanced protective vehicle could be defeated by a mystery malfunction, what did that say about their readiness? Zoe Mitchell was working under the hood of an old Humvee when Staff Sergeant Thompson found her. Her short blonde hair was cut in military fashion, her hands covered in oil-stained gloves, and her army t-shirt darkened with sweat. Small scars dotted her face, permanent reminders of shrapnel from an IED blast. She had been invisible in this motor pool for 3 years. While engineers with degrees and certifications commanded respect and attention, she quietly performed routine maintenance, her expertise overlooked, her experience dismissed as trauma-induced paranoia. "Sergeant Mitchell." Thompson approached. Zoe looked up. "Yes?" "Colonel Rodriguez wants to see you." Zoe frowned. In 3 years of working here, she had never been called to speak with senior officers. "Is there a problem?" "MRAP issue. He wants to consult with you." Zoe wiped her hands with a rag and followed Thompson. As they approached the MRAP, she saw a large crowd gathered around it. Engineers, technicians, and senior officers clustered around the vehicle, their voices carrying frustration and confusion. The scene was familiar to her. She had witnessed similar gatherings in Afghanistan, groups of experts standing around disabled vehicles while convoy schedules slipped and mission timelines stretched. The difference was that in Afghanistan, lives hung in the balance with every passing hour. "Sergeant Mitchell," Colonel Rodriguez approached, "we have an issue with our MRAP. What's your experience with these vehicles?" Zoe responded carefully. "Sir, I served as a combat engineer in Afghanistan. I performed IED disposal and vehicle inspection duties. Have you looked at this vehicle?" "No, sir. I only work on routine maintenance vehicles." Rodriguez gestured toward the MRAP. "Would you take a look? Maybe you can bring a different perspective. If you've ever felt overlooked because of your background, hit that like button. Sometimes the most valuable expertise comes from unexpected places." Zoe walked slowly around the vehicle. She examined the exterior plating, checked the wheels, and inspected the visible engine components underneath. The other engineers watched her, whispering among themselves. She could feel their skepticism. What could a traumatized ex-soldier contribute that trained engineers couldn't? "What's the nature of the fuel system problem?" she asked. "Fuel pumps are operational, but the engine isn't receiving fuel," explained a technician. "It's as if the fuel lines are blocked." Zoe opened the engine hood and peered inside. She traced the fuel lines with her eyes, examined connection points, and checked mounting brackets. Then she reached the fuel tank mounting bracket and stopped. She placed her hand slowly on the bracket's surface. Her fingers moved across the metal, feeling for imperfections that eyes couldn't detect. The other engineers watched her with growing bewilderment. "What are you looking for?" an engineer asked. "Microfractures," Zoe replied quietly. "Microfractures? There's nothing there." Zoe paused at a specific section of the bracket. She kept her fingers in the same spot, applying gentle pressure. "There's something here." Colonel Rodriguez approached. "What kind of something?" "A hairline crack, invisible to the eye, but detectable by touch." One of the engineers laughed. "Sergeant, that bracket has been inspected 3 times. No damage found." Zoe looked at him. "This crack is caused by IED shock waves. It doesn't show up in standard inspections." "That's ridiculous," another engineer interjected. "This vehicle took no damage from explosions." "Didn't it?" Zoe's voice hardened. "This vehicle was exposed to 12 different explosions. Each blast causes microscopic damage to metal structures. This damage accumulates over time." Colonel Rodriguez looked skeptical. "Sergeant, that's just a theory. Do you have proof?" "Sir, this crack is causing vibration-induced fuel line disruption. In combat conditions, with adrenaline and high stress, this vibration goes unnoticed. But in calm testing conditions, it affects fuel flow." One of the engineers objected. "That's impossible. A crack that's small couldn't have such a major effect." Zoe turned to him. "Have you ever been exposed to an IED blast?" "No, but I have. 12 times, and after each blast, I learned that our vehicles suffered invisible damage. This damage doesn't show immediately, but eventually, at the most critical moments, it can kill you." The group fell silent. The weight of her words, spoken with the authority of someone who had literally been through the fire, gave them pause. Colonel Rodriguez placed his hands on his hips. "Sergeant Mitchell, this is a very specific claim, but without evidence, we won't dismantle a $2 million vehicle. Sir, I can show you this crack." "How?" "If it's not visible to the eye." Zoe walked to a tool cart and retrieved a special flashlight. "UV light and penetrant testing. Technique we learned in combat engineer training." One of the engineers grumbled. "Sergeant, we've already performed those tests." "Have you?" "This specific point from this angle, looking specifically for IED damage." Silence fell over the group. Zoe applied penetrant chemical to the specific section of the bracket. She waited 10 minutes, then turned on the UV light. A thin, bright line appeared on the metal surface. "There," she said. "Hairline crack. The engineers crowded around to look. Indeed, there was a very thin line visible under the UV light. "This is so small," said a technician. "Why would such a tiny crack cause a major problem?" Zoe explained, "This crack is at the fuel line mounting point. With every engine vibration, this crack opens and closes. This creates micro interruptions in fuel flow." "But the engine runs," another engineer objected. "It runs, but fuel pressure fluctuates. On smooth roads, this isn't a problem. But on rough terrain, additional vibration completely cuts off fuel flow." The explanation made technical sense, but the implications were staggering. If Zoe was right, it meant that combat damage could create delayed failures, vehicles that appeared fine but could fail at critical moments. Colonel Rodriguez was thoughtful. How would this be repaired? The bracket needs to be replaced, but more importantly, all vehicles that have seen IED exposure should be inspected for this type of hidden damage. One of the engineers objected. "That would be extremely expensive and time-consuming." Zoe shot him a sharp look. "This vehicle is scheduled to deploy to Afghanistan tomorrow. There will be 20 soldiers in that convoy. This crack could cause the vehicle to fail under enemy fire. Are 20 soldiers' lives worth less than time and cost savings?" The moral weight of her argument was undeniable. In the sterile environment of the motor pool, it was easy to focus on technical specifications and budget concerns, but Zoe forced them to remember that these weren't just machines. They were life support systems for soldiers in harm's way. Colonel Rodriguez intervened. "Sergeant, this is a serious claim. If you're wrong..." "Sir, I'm not wrong. I recognize this type of damage because I've lived through it. The invisible damage that IED blasts cause to vehicles is one of the biggest threats on the battlefield." "Prove it," Rodriguez said with finality. Zoe nodded. "Replace the bracket and test the vehicle. If I'm right, the problem will be solved. If I'm wrong, you've only lost one bracket." Discussions broke out among the engineers. Some argued it was pointless, others thought it was worth trying. The debate revealed deeper tensions about expertise, experience, and who had the right to make technical judgments. Finally, Colonel Rodriguez made his decision. "All right, the bracket will be replaced. But Sergeant Mitchell, if this doesn't solve the problem, your expertise in this matter will be seriously questioned." Zoe held her head high. "Understood, sir." 2 hours later, the MRAP with its new bracket was ready for testing. A large crowd had gathered in the motor pool. Engineers, technicians, and Colonel Rodriguez, everyone wanted to witness the test that would either vindicate or humiliate the retired combat engineer. The atmosphere was tense. For the engineers, this test represented more than just troubleshooting. It was about professional pride and the validation of formal training versus battlefield experience. For Zoe, it was about proving that trauma survivors possessed valuable knowledge, not just psychological wounds. Word had spread throughout the base about the unusual situation. A retired combat engineer with PTSD was challenging the conclusions of multiple expert teams. Some viewed it as desperation, grasping at straws to solve an impossible problem. Others saw it as an opportunity to learn from unconventional expertise. Dr. Crawford from General Dynamics was particularly skeptical. He had spent 15 years designing military vehicles, held 3 engineering degrees, and had never encountered a situation where battlefield trauma translated into technical insight. "This is highly irregular," he muttered to his colleague. "We're allowing emotional bias to override scientific methodology." But Captain Peters, who had served 2 tours in Iraq, understood something the civilian contractors didn't. "Sometimes the people who've been shot at know things that the people in laboratories don't," he said quietly. "Test driver ready," Staff Sergeant Thompson reported. "Full test on Rocky Hill course," Rodriguez ordered. "Rough terrain, challenging conditions." The MRAP started moving. First, it was tested on smooth road. The engine performed flawlessly. Then, it transitioned to the rough terrain section. Steep slopes, deep potholes, rocky ground. Everything was handled without issue. "Perfect performance," came the radio report. "No problems whatsoever." Amazed murmurs rose from the crowd. The engineers stared at Zoe with newfound respect and bewilderment. Colonel Rodriguez approached her. "Sergeant Mitchell, how did you know?" "Sir, anyone who understands the effects of IED blasts on vehicles would know." The problem is that no one here has that experience. How did you learn this? A pained expression crossed Zoe's face. The hard way, sir. In Afghanistan, our convoy's MRAP stopped working due to a similar problem while under enemy fire. I lost 2 friends that day. The crowd fell silent. The technical problem suddenly had a human face, the face of soldiers who had died because invisible damage went undetected. After that day, I learned to look for invisible damage in every vehicle inspection. Metal fatigue, microcracks, vibration damage. These are the hidden killers of the battlefield. One of the engineers bowed his head in shame. I apologize, Sergeant. We underestimated your experience. It doesn't matter, Zoe replied. What matters is learning from this. We need to develop invisible damage protocols for all combat vehicles. If you believe that experience matters more than credentials, share this video with someone who needs to see it. Real expertise often comes from the hardest lessons. Colonel Rodriguez nodded. You're right. Can you develop this protocol? Zoe was surprised. Sir? Sergeant Mitchell, your expertise in this area is clear. If you're willing, I can assign you to develop a combat vehicle safety inspection protocol. Zoe hesitated. Sir, I'm no longer active duty. I just work in the motor pool. That can change. If you accept, I can reassign you as a specialist consultant. This protocol could save thousands of soldiers' lives in the future. The offer represented more than just a job change. It was validation that her traumatic experiences had value, that her knowledge could protect others from the losses she had endured. 3 weeks later, Zoe Mitchell was working in her new office at Fort Bragg. She was developing the Combat Vehicle Hidden Damage Assessment Protocol. Her walls were covered with photographs of various vehicle damage and technical schematics. The transformation was remarkable. The woman who had been relegated to routine maintenance was now consulted by engineers from across the military. Her protocol was being implemented at bases worldwide, and requests for vehicle inspections poured in from various commands. Sergeant, a young technician entered. New MRAP shipment has arrived, ready for inspection. Zoe smiled. I'll be right there. She was no longer just performing routine maintenance in the motor pool. Pentagon requests, inspection demands from various bases. Zoe's developed protocol had become the U.S. Army's standard procedure. Her work area had been transformed into a comprehensive analysis center. High-powered microscopes for detecting microfractures, specialized lighting equipment for revealing hidden damage, and computer systems for documenting findings filled the space. Most importantly, she was training other technicians to recognize the signs she had learned through painful experience. The training program she developed was unlike anything the military had seen before. It didn't just focus on technical procedures, it incorporated the psychological understanding of how combat stress affects both vehicles and the people who operate them. Zoe taught her students to think like survivors, to understand that the same forces that traumatize humans also traumatize machines. When you're inspecting a vehicle that's been in combat, she would tell her trainees, you're not just looking for visible damage. You're looking for the invisible wounds that combat leaves behind. Every explosion, every impact, every moment of terror leaves a mark. Our job is to find those marks before they become fatal. Her approach was revolutionary. Traditional vehicle inspection focused on obvious damage, dents, burns, broken components. But Zoe's protocol recognized that the most dangerous damage was often invisible, hidden in the molecular structure of metal that had been stressed beyond normal limits. The Pentagon took notice. General Patricia Hayes, head of Army Material Command, visited Fort Bragg specifically to observe Zoe's program. Sergeant Mitchell, she said after watching a training session, you've fundamentally changed how we think about combat vehicle maintenance. This isn't just about fixing machines. It's about understanding the total impact of warfare on our equipment. Sergeant Mitchell, Colonel Rodriguez entered her office. Good news. Sir, the Pentagon wants to expand your protocol to all NATO countries. An international training program will be launched. Zoe was amazed. Really? Yes. And there's something else. We're promoting you, Staff Sergeant Zoe Mitchell. Zoe's eyes welled up. Sir, this is too much. No, it's not nearly enough. You didn't just repair one vehicle. You developed a life-saving system for thousands of soldiers. The promotion represented more than rank advancement. It was recognition that trauma could be transformed into expertise, that survivors possessed knowledge that could protect others. That evening, Zoe visited the motor pool one last time. She wouldn't be working there anymore, but it was the place where she had been reborn. The humble workspace where she had been overlooked had become the birthplace of a revolution in military vehicle safety. "Mitchell," Staff Sergeant Thompson called out. "News from Afghanistan." "What news?" "The team using your protocol found hidden damage in 3 different vehicles. These vehicles could have failed during operations." Zoe nodded. "How many soldiers would have been in those vehicles?" 45. "So we saved 45 lives." Thompson smiled. "You saved them, Sergeant?" "No," Zoe replied. "We saved them. As a team." The conversation highlighted the broader impact of her work. This wasn't just about fixing one vehicle. It was about creating a systematic approach to identifying hidden dangers that could affect thousands of soldiers worldwide. The ripple effects extended far beyond vehicle maintenance. Military psychiatrists began studying Zoe's case, recognizing that trauma survivors often developed hypervigilance and pattern recognition skills that could be valuable assets rather than just symptoms to be treated. Dr. Sarah Chen, a leading researcher in military psychology, published a groundbreaking paper titled "Traumatic Expertise: How Combat Survivors Develop Enhanced Threat Detection Capabilities." The study followed 50 combat veterans who had been diagnosed with PTSD, examining how their hypervigilance could be redirected into productive applications. Zoe's success became a model for a new approach to veteran rehabilitation, one that viewed trauma-induced changes as potentially valuable adaptations rather than just disabilities to be overcome. "What we learned from Sergeant Mitchell," Dr. Chen explained, "is that the same neurological changes that make trauma survivors hypersensitive to threats can also make them exceptionally skilled at detecting subtle signs of danger that others miss. The key is channeling this sensitivity into constructive applications." Military units across the globe began implementing similar programs. In Germany, a former EOD specialist who struggled with PTSD was recruited to develop improved bomb detection protocols. In Japan, a veteran who had difficulty with civilian employment found new purpose training others to identify structural weaknesses in military equipment. 6 months later, Zoe Mitchell's hidden damage assessment protocol had become NATO's standard procedure. Hundreds of specialists worldwide were receiving training to implement this protocol. Zoe now worked at the Pentagon, serving as head of the Combat Vehicle Safety Division. Her office displayed photographs of every vehicle she had helped save, but the most important change was in the military's perspective. Veterans with PTSD were no longer viewed as patients, but as experienced experts. The knowledge they brought from the battlefield was more valuable than theoretical training. Her protocol had identified hidden damage in over 200 vehicles across multiple continents. Each discovery represented potential lives saved, potential tragedies averted. The invisible wounds of war had been transformed into invisible protection for future warriors. But perhaps the most significant impact was on how the military viewed its veterans. The traditional model saw PTSD as a condition to be managed, symptoms to be suppressed. Zoe's success demonstrated that trauma could be a source of unique insight, that the hypervigilance and heightened threat detection associated with PTSD could be valuable assets when properly directed. A year after her promotion, Zoe stood before the Senate Armed Services Committee, testifying about her program's success. "Senators," she said, "we have been treating our combat veterans as broken soldiers who need to be fixed. But what if instead we recognize them as enhanced soldiers who possess capabilities that others don't? What if we viewed their trauma not as a disability, but as a different kind of training?" Senator Patricia Morrison leaned forward. "Sergeant Mitchell, can you quantify the impact of your program?" "Yes, ma'am. In the past 18 months, the Mitchell Protocol has identified critical hidden damage in 247 vehicles across 23 different military installations. Conservative estimates suggest this has prevented between 800 and 1,200 potential casualties. The program has also reduced vehicle maintenance costs by 40% by identifying problems before they become major failures. The statistics were impressive, but Zoe knew the real victory wasn't in numbers. It was in changing perceptions. Every veteran who found new purpose, every trauma survivor who discovered their pain had value, every soldier whose life was saved by knowledge born from another's suffering. Today, at military bases worldwide, when vehicle inspections are performed, a small plaque can be seen. Mitchell Protocol, Hidden Damage Assessment. Some scars only a survivor can see. This plaque is more than just a procedure description. It's proof that people who have experienced trauma can transform their pain into strength, their wounds into wisdom. Zoe Mitchell's story is not just about one female soldier. It's about the possibility that invisible wounds can be transformed into invisible knowledge that protects others. The protocol she developed had far-reaching implications beyond vehicle safety. It changed how the military viewed trauma survivors, recognizing that their experiences, rather than being liabilities, were actually invaluable assets for protecting future soldiers. If this story inspired you, don't forget to hit that like button. If you believe that trauma survivors possess valuable knowledge that should be recognized and utilized, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And what do you think? Was Zoe right to transform her painful experience into protective expertise for others? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more hidden heroes stories like this, because every day there are hidden heroes living among us, people whose scars tell stories of survival, whose pain has been transformed into protection for others. And remember, sometimes the greatest strength comes from the deepest wounds. The eyes of survivors can see things that others cannot. Their invisible scars become invisible shields for those who follow. Thank you for watching. See you in the next story.